Hey there, I'm Jeannie Loeb, an alumnus of Jefferson's senior year experience and sister of Bobby Koo, who was a member of the first graduating class of Jefferson for Science and Technology. He's also the designer of your monument up front, although his original design didn't have a figure in such a interesting squatting position. I'm also faculty of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and a mom of 4 children, one of whom is also in high school. I know that many of you are working very hard, and perhaps in the midst of all this, you've had some low moments. I want to share with you some advice from colleagues, friends, and myself, which I hope will help to decrease anxiety and fears. Let's start by demystifying the process of getting into college.
Hey everybody, my name is Melvin McDermott, one of the assistant directors here in the Office of Admissions at Chapel Hill. I'm able to speak to what specifically colleges are looking for, but more specifically what UNC is looking for. You need to make sure that your SAT or ACT, whichever test you take, we don't have a preference for either one, is as high as you can possibly make it. Like upper 1400s for just the reading and math, but just an average. So I always tell people, just because you score a little bit lower doesn't mean you won't get in. And just because you score a little bit higher, that also doesn't mean you'll get in. For the ACT, the average score is like upper 30s, so like 32, 33 is the typical admit. But again, just because you score a little bit lower doesn't mean you won't get in. Just because you score perfect score, it doesn't guarantee you a spot either. One of the things we consider in your application is your GPA or your rank, comparing it to how you performed compared to the peers in your particular school. So just because you have a 4.0, if the highest in your graduating class is a 4.0, that might be really good. But if you have a 4.0 and the highest in your class is like a 16.0 or whatever your scale may be, we kind of evaluate it in that way. Another thing we consider very heavily in your application is how rigorous your course load was, advanced classes, your APs and your IBs and things like that. And once you start taking those more challenging courses, you want to still try to maintain those A's and those B's as much as you can to be the most competitive. If you get an A in an AP course, for example, and you take that AP test and you get 3, 4, or 5, you're typically fine. But if you have an A in that class and you score like a 2 or even a 1 on that AP test, that's going to raise a red flag to us. The next component we look at are your extracurriculars activities inside and outside of school. For inside the school, we look at being members of clubs from the time you're a freshman to the time you're a senior in high school there. And there's one thing, being a member of a club, and there's another thing to be a leader of a club. And there's another thing to be a leader of a club and to be a leader of a club that can show some type of impact or accomplishment. We've seen applicants who apply and they're involved in maybe 4 or 5 different clubs, but they're consistent throughout their high school career. And they write about it, and they write about it in a way that's compelling. So, just because you're president of, who knows, the National Honor Society, for example. Everybody's president of something, right? So if all you put is president of a club and that's all you put on your application, that doesn't say as much as someone who put president of National Honor Society that accomplished X, Y, and Z. There are some students who literally are not able to participate in extracurricular activities because of, for example, family responsibilities, or they had a part-time job that they had to maintain to support their families. Talk about that, but talk about what you learned, what skills you gained from that, how that kind of shaped who you are today as a person. So the next component we look at are essay. Explain, what makes you tick, or what makes you unique. You don't have to be the most unique person in the world, but we don't know you, so help us get to know you. Maybe there's an extracurricular activity that you're involved in, and you write about more in depth what you overcame, what you achieved, the different interactions you had with the community or other students, or maybe it's a new idea that you came up with. Write about that in that essay, and that shows us that you are basically committed. How interesting are you? Because we're looking for a variety of different types of people. So help us get to know who you are. Because we'll have some really, really outgoing people who are involved in every single thing. And then we also have folks who are more behind the scenes kind of people. Maybe they don't like talking in public. We have a whole host of different types of people, and we're looking for that. Make sure you proofread your essays, because we're looking for that too. There's nothing worse than getting an essay and in the first couple of sentences you misspelled, who knows, your name. It could be anything. So make sure you proofread those essays. The final component that we sort of look at in the admissions process are letters of recommendation. Just some adult that knows you well enough to write about you. The worst kind of recommendation letter that you can send us is something that says, Melvin's a great student. He's got 1,000 on the GPA scale. He's got 1 trillion on the SAT or ACT scale. He's involved in this bulleted list of clubs. He's amazing. We're going to miss him. You should admit him. Love, counselor, XYZ, right? That type of letter doesn't add anything to your application or to your admissions process that we couldn't have got from your application or from your transcript already. So when you're thinking about those letters of recommendation, sit down and have a conversation with those you're interested in. So maybe make a list of 4 or 5 people that you think might have some good insights into who you are as a person, and sit down and have a conversation with those people and let them know what you're trying to do, where you're applying to school, what you want to do with your life, and that sort of thing, and ask if they have examples that they can share with the admissions committee about who you are as a person. Maybe it's something that stood out to them in the classroom. Maybe it's something that stood out to them in the workplace. Or maybe it's just something they've never seen in a student before. Advice for those kind of trying to balance their academics with their extracurricular activities. Again, generally the more academically challenging your coursework is, the better. But we're also going to be looking for you to be involved in extracurriculars. So, say for example, with foreign language, as long as you meet our minimum course requirements for foreign language, you can go as far as you want to in that language. You can go above and beyond it if you want to, but you've met that requirement. So you can feel free to take other things, like for example music, and really excel at that music. Another cool thing we like to see, or sometimes that we see in applicants, are those who have competed, those who are taking their craft, something that they're really good at, beyond their high school, maybe like I said across state lines or nationally. Those also stand out. You don't have to, but to be more competitive, it's always good to stand out in that way too, especially if you place 1, 2, or 3.
I hope you were able to glean that universities are looking for a mix of smart, interesting, and contributing people. If you were my child, and so I'm speaking here as a parent and not as an official UNC representative, I tell you to take as many AP courses as possible, but not so many that it would adversely affect your performance in those classes. Build a strong academic foundation. Aside from this, seek out and engage fully in your passions and show what amazing things you can do. As you'll find out in just a moment, that is exactly what scholarship programs are looking for.
I'm Dan Thornton, and I am the Associate Director of the Office of Scholarships and Student Aid, and my primary role in this office is to oversee the awarding of merit and need-based scholarships. I know that high school is a very stressful experience for many students because there are so many expectations, and there's a lot of mystery surrounding the college application process and the admission process and the scholarship selection process. And I thought I would take a few minutes and try to tell you a few things that might put it all into perspective and make the experience less anxiety-provoking. We want to make sure that every student who applies is assured that his or her application is read thoroughly, considering all aspects of that application. Rest assured that even if you're not at a high-powered high school, that your application will get the same holistic review and will be reviewed just as favorably as any other applicant. Many of you are probably wondering not so much about admission to UNC, but what it might take to receive consideration for a merit scholarship. First off, merit scholarships are not plentiful at UNC. They're very limited. And when we look at students who've been admitted to the university, what we're looking for are things like intellectual curiosity, engagement inside and outside the classroom, engagement in the community, a collaborative spirit. Those students who get selected for merit scholarships seem to be able to find an extra gear. They take it a little bit further. I can give some examples, such as a student who may be interested in classics in Greek and Latin and is taking Greek and Latin in school, But in addition to that is exploring archaeological digs or doing courses at a local college to deepen that knowledge and to satisfy that curiosity. It's one of those things that we love when we encounter a student who also may not be able to, because of circumstances, take advantage of courses at a college or a community college, but writes eloquently about something he or she has always wanted to delve into. Those are pieces of evidence that we look for that spark that carries a student outside of the normal parameters that are for most people just fine and they are excellent, but the students that take it a little bit beyond and push the edges of the envelope. One thing I want to add, and it's not to be discouraging at all, in fact it's just to be real, and that is not everybody who applies to UNC gets in. Many excellent students don't get into UNC, and it really is a disappointing prospect when a student gets a letter saying that they've not been admitted to the university, and I understand that. But that is not the end of the world. This university is one of probably a couple hundred universities in this country that can offer you a stellar experience. So if it doesn't work out with Carolina, it's not the end of the world. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something to be discouraged about. There are so many fine institutions in this country for you to explore and grow at. And any of these can provide you with wonderful opportunities. It really is the measure of the student himself or herself to the extent that they take advantage of these great opportunities. And I hear from students all the time who were initially disappointed that they either were not admitted to the university or were not recipients of a merit scholarship, and they went elsewhere and they loved it. So that's just something to keep in the back of your minds as you embark on the application process. There are so many great places where you can fit in. There's not just one place that is perfect. This is a wonderful school. It's a great place to learn and grow, but there are also others. So if you apply and you're not admitted, that is not any sort of indication on your value or worth or intellect. It's mainly just a matter of a limited number of spaces and a large demand for that very small number. But there are plenty of other places where you will be very happy.
I'd like to emphasize one of the points that Dr. Thornton made because it is so very important, and that is make sure to take a look at the big picture. There are many great universities in this country, and getting into or being rejected by any one university, no matter which university that is, will not make or break you. In fact, if you pick your favorite university and look at the faculty there, you're going to find a wide variety of educational backgrounds. And what this suggests is that there are many opportunities for you to find success. Another big picture consideration is to note that the distribution of happiness is about the same across universities. What I mean by this is that Ivy League schools do not graduate any more happy people than non-Ivy League schools. And isn't happiness what we're ultimately all going for? But be careful here. I tell you all these things in order to help allay any excess anxiety or fears, but not to serve as an excuse for you to do less than you are capable of doing. As a parent, I certainly want my children to be happy and not overridden with anxiety. But at the same time, I also want them to take full advantage of all opportunities. So I tell my children to do as much as they possibly can, and sometimes that involves doing things that they don't quite want to do but need to do, unless it becomes too much. The question is, how can you tell when it becomes too much? We're going to turn next for tips from an acclaimed clinical psychologist in the field of anxiety. I'd like to introduce you to my friend and colleague, Dr. John Abramowitz. He is a clinical psychologist here at UNC Chapel Hill, as well as director of our anxiety clinics, and he is renowned on this topic of anxiety.
Thanks. So some of the signs of anxiety would be sleep disturbance. So often people who have a lot of anxiety have trouble sleeping because their mind is kind of going a mile a minute. Also, muscle tension is a big part of anxiety. So people often get sore, or they might have headaches. Headaches are a big part of feeling anxious. Anxiety can also affect your appetite, so you might not feel very hungry. Other people, though, might eat a lot when they get anxious. Some people have a habit of eating when they get anxious. Probably the most significant sign of anxiety is what's called catastrophic thinking. And this is where you have a lot of those what-ifs, and you're jumping to conclusions. Bad things are going to happen. You're thinking about all sorts of terrible stuff that might happen and how you won't be able to cope and how terrible it would be. So here are some tips for dealing with anxiety. One thing that's very important is to get a good amount of sleep. And so you want to make sure that you're getting, 6, 7, 8 hours of sleep. One way to know that you're getting enough sleep is that you wake up before your alarm clock goes off. If you're consistently getting awakened by your alarm clock, it means you're not getting enough sleep.
I can't emphasize enough how important it is that you get your sleep. It is not wasteful, and it is not an indulgent activity. In fact, researchers believe that it is critical for thinking, learning and memory, and perhaps optimal brain growth. There is a lot of research which links sleep with cognitive processes. To name a few, scientists think that sleep helps to clear out our minds of excess unnecessary information we pick up throughout the day, so that we are ready to take in much more information the next day. Sleep has also been correlated with creativity. In one study, they compared students who were allowed to take a nap after trying a difficult task with students who were not allowed to take a nap. And what they discovered is that the students who were allowed to take a nap actually were much more likely to solve that difficult problem than the students who did not nap. I think even more interesting is that it's been shown that during sleep, we actually practice some of the things that we learn throughout the day. And for those things that we practice while we are sleeping, they find that our performance is enhanced. So don't skip out on your sleep.
Another thing that's important is to eat well. So there are certain foods that can actually make you more stressed out because of the way that they get digested and the way that you feel after you eat them. Consulting some books about healthy diets and healthy eating styles can be helpful to reduce your anxiety and get you eating foods that are going to help you to be productive and feel more energetic. So some examples of foods that can increase anxiety would be foods with a lot of sugar and a lot of fat, because these things tend to make you feel sluggish. They change the level of sugar in your blood, and when that fluctuates a lot, you don't tend to feel as well. On the other hand, foods that take a longer time to digest, high fiber foods, foods that are lower in fat, foods that are high in protein, these foods actually give us more energy, and they make us feel better too. And to that end as well, exercise is really important. We know that exercise has antidepressant effects. It also has anti-anxiety effects, because when you exercise, it does secrete hormones in your body that make you actually feel better, called endorphins. This is a book that I have written. It's called the Stress Less Workbook. And it goes through a lot of these different kinds of strategies, healthy living strategies like eating and sleeping healthy and exercise, and also other kinds of strategies as well. So I definitely recommend this. But the main kind of overarching theme of this book is what's called cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT. CBT is a set of techniques. It's a psychological treatment that involves learning these techniques for thinking differently and behaving differently. So being able to curb some of those catastrophic thinking strategies that I talked about before. And so if you can use a self-help book to help you, that's terrific. But if you're still having trouble, then you want to find a therapist who can use cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT. And I'll just end by giving you 2 resources to go to online where you might be able to find information about CBT and even find a therapist. One is the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapy, or ABCT. And the website is www.abct.org. The other is the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, www.adaa.org. And both of those websites have links to Find a Therapist, where you can type in, your town, your city, your difficulty, and, they can figure out who might be a good match for you.
A common reason why students experience depression, anxiety, and stress is because they're simply doing too much. They feel overwhelmed. Dr. Maitland is a learning specialist who works with many college students, coaching them to become better students. Hear from her some tips on how you can identify activities that you might not need to keep up, making your life a little more manageable.
Hi there, my name is Teresa Maitland, and I work at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill with very bright, dedicated students just like you. And one of the things that I've learned is it's usually the very creative, bright, dedicated student who says yes to a lot of things because of how curious you are and how smart you are that can get really overwhelmed and stressed because of how they're spending their time. Could this be you? And you're wondering, how would I know? I have some suggestions for you to figure out if this fits you. Would you be willing to write down everything you do for a 2 or 3 day period and actually log your time? It can be hard to do, but really revealing. By doing this activity, what you're going to find out is where is your time going and how much time are you doing the things that you feel you have to do, school assignments, maybe even work on your future, volunteering. What are the things that you feel you should be doing? Maybe you have created a nonprofit because you want to look good on your resume. There's a lot of shoulds that dedicated students will do. Let's look at everything that you've done the last 2 or 3 days and categorize it by have to do and should do. Usually what's missing in a creative, smart student schedule is time for themselves. You might be looking at me and saying, I don't have time for myself. And that is exactly what I'm encouraging you to look at. Do you have time in your schedule to sleep? Silly question. Most college and high school students don't sleep very much. Do you have time to eat, time to exercise? And what about time for you? That may seem impossible. But did you know that if you don't put those self-care activities into your life, that can be exactly why you're stressed and overwhelmed? Once you discover how much time really is going to you, then my suggestion to you is to look at the have-tos and the shoulds and become very critical. Do you really have to have 4 outside activities, or could 2 suffice? What are the shoulds that you're feeling pressure to do? If those are dominating your schedule and there's not time for your rest or time for you to do nothing or do the things you love like painting or play piano, you won't be taking care of yourself. And the bottom line is only you are the instrument that can do all this. If you don't care for your soul and your body, you won't be the successful person you want to be. Hope this helps. I know it's not easy to do, but I see every day the students I work with who make these hard decisions and say no are getting better at life.
The world asks a lot of you, and quite frankly, I don't see it changing anytime soon. So the best piece of advice that I could give to you is to know yourself. Are you doing your utmost best? Are you fully engaged with your passions? If so, then great. And don't let rejection from any particular school or scholarship program make you doubt yourself. In fact, if you consider some of the most wildly successful people, you'll find that they have faced rejection, often multiple times. In fact, I might even say that people who push the boundaries like that make themselves vulnerable to failure and or rejection. Take Walt Disney, for example. He was once fired for lack of imagination. J.K. Rowling's book was rejected by 12 different publishing companies, and the publishers who did publish Harry Potter advised her to get another job because there was no money in children's books. Now, I'm not going to lie. Rejection and or failure hurt. But remember that there are many opportunities out there. Go seek them out. So, learn lots, have some fun, and love your life.
Good.